asked me to talk a little bit about what happens with the Water Balance Alliance, and there's some members that identified themselves in here, but we're a grassroots organization. We work really hard at being a friendly place, a host for innovation and conversation about water, whether that is surface, groundwater, municipals, whatever it is in a water conversation. We'd like to say we can host that and look at and develop and extract ideas and innovation and figure out how to deliver that, or how to get to the right people or involve the right people. This is our 6th year, the 5th year that we have had a demonstration project, which if you have the time, and I mean time, to talk to Ted Tejan in the back of the room. He's led the demonstration project for 5 years. And that is a project that spans the state, basically from the Republican Basin all the way out to the North Platte NRD, out near Scotts Bluff and Gearing. That has led to a lot of different things. It's led to a lot of different conversations, but more importantly, we're looking at innovation. We're looking at trying to bring to the producers, the people that make the biggest difference in water management at the ground level, at their own operations, in their own hometowns, and their own communities. And by doing that, one of our beliefs of many, that we can affect some really significant change. And it really boils down to the process of how we're recognized, how those changes or those savings or those interactions are turned into real water, or into water savings, or into resource management, or all of the buzzwords that we're all accustomed to. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got there, about what we're working on, and then how we deliver that message. So you saw the slide that kind of introduced me, but it talked a little bit about, is there enough water, or is there not enough management? So here's the way I look at it personally in our own operation. I have a young son that's returned, so 4th generation. I have now just have a new grandson here within the last 9 weeks, so have a 5th generation on the farm that we're pretty excited about. But you can take a look at it, and how we look at it on the farm is do we use it up? Do we sip or do we slurp? And my son, my 25-year-old son came up with that. He goes, Dad, that's really how we have to look at it on our own operation. I farm in 3 NRDs. I'm in the Twin Platte, the Middle Republican, and the Upper Republican. I've been a part of every IMP. I've been a part of Basin IMP. I've been a part of task force, sustainability. I think the only thing that I haven't been on was the original Water Policy Task Force, for LB 962. And everywhere we go, now with the Republican Basin IMP, I see Karen's here, so leading that endeavor. But every one of those, it's how do we get people to talk? How do we take all of the research, all the ideas, all the concepts, and really get them to the ground? So now this is where you're going to come into play here. And I'm going to ask Amy to kind of be the recorder, and I volunteer here. Otherwise, I'm going to pick on you. I know enough of you that I'm going to pick on you. So you can volunteer, I'm going to pick on you. But I want you to tell me what you see in this slide, because there's going to be a second slide, so that you're intrigued a little bit. But I want you to tell me what you see. Surface water, groundwater, municipality, lobby, sportsmen, whatever, environmentalists. Tell me what you see in this picture.
Center pivots.
Building site in the wrong place.
I rolled a lot of them over, Ron.
Lots of green.
Straight
Lots
rows.
of green or green?
Green.
Straight rows.
A house.
Water and wind problems just west of the building.
What, Ron? What do you think?
Water or wind problems left driveway.
Monoculture.
The spelling count? No.
We'll decipher it.
Okay.
Livestock.
Green areas that don't seem to have a center pivot. I can't tell. Oh, it does, yeah.
What's that? Weird?
It looks like a very big pivot.
It is rather large. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's probably 1,700 feet, so probably 150, 180 acres for the corner machine.
Adaptation and technology.
Variation in how the plants are growing. There's yellow and darker green striping.
Whoop. Geez, what did I do? Does this have a pointer?
Yeah, it's in the middle.
Okay. Who else owns a farm in the room? Anybody own a farm? John does? Jim? Tim? Interesting, because here's what I see. Family, farm, business, generations, and a livelihood that they're trying to do everything they can with it. It's theirs. Who knows, has this thing been in the family 100 years, 150 years? It's been, but when we have water conversations, this is hard for me to reconcile. Because when we have water conversations in the eastern part of Nebraska or in Kearney, Nebraska or Scottsbluff, Nebraska, this is what we're talking about. This is their business, this is their home, this is their turf. And this particular instance, this is quite an innovation. I can probably have Brad talk more about this from Lindsay, but this machine actually bends twice. And then it has a corner machine that also folds in and out. So technology. I'd want to talk to this farmer. I think you better check his planter or talk to the guy that's cultivating. I was going to talk to the guy that put on the fertilizer, and that was a good observation. I think that we got a little, maybe a plug nozzle or two. It's hard to say. But I guess what I'm getting at is our perspective in terms of when we talk about groundwater, surface water, farming, municipal, ag, urban, that whole piece of the puzzle, we don't always talk the same. We don't talk the same language. And that has been a difficult transition for me even in when I step into this room, or I step into a role as a stakeholder in an IMP, is that I'm asked to understand what happens in the rest of the state, or what the needs are for Lincoln, or for Hastings water quality, or whatever the issue is. We're asked to do that, and often I have to look at these things and go, okay, where are we headed with this? And so my deal has been, quite frankly, is talking about from this level up. And I'm going to jog through that very quickly here. But I want you to think about that, because we're going to have another slide here at the end, but it's going to be different. And so I want you to be prepared for what that's going to say to you, how it speaks to you in those conversations. This is what started it all. We led a group. Actually, MPPD came to us as landowners around Gentleman Station and said, gosh guys, we're going to drill a well field that we need to make sure that Gentleman Station continues to operate and provide power to a million households. Okay. And Bill Furman, at the time, the CEO, he was an innovator. I just can't say enough about, he had made the comment, he said, we got to figure out how to do this together, how we have a mitigation agreement that if we impact one another, we at least have a place where we have the discussion. And they basically told us that, okay, if we pump, you can't, or if we have impacts, we're going to compensate you. We're going to do something to have this agreement made. Well, we go, okay, that doesn't make any sense to us, and we didn't understand consumptive use, we didn't understand transmissivity and hydrologically connected, and all those early conversations that most farmers don't know what that is. They just know that back to that picture, that's their place. That's their roots. That's their family. That's their operation. That's their business. That's their revenue. This was very telling, as this is just Perkins County. This was done by Brown and Caldwell in conjunction with some work that Frank was doing with Matt Lindbergh. And one of the things that really struck us was at the time in Perkins County, there's Stinking Water Creek, and that's why we picked Perkins County, is it had a very little surface water component to it. So we just stuck with what was happening at the land surface. And so one of the things we're going to talk about today at our board meeting is redoing this again and getting the information up into the 2012 or 13 and looking at these changes. Because here's the thing that is really, really capturing me, is our summer fallow, at that time in Perkins County, there was nearly 93,000 acres of summer fallow. I'll argue that there's probably less than a third of that now. So if you take that consumption that they identified at that time, in that year, at 15.1, and you change that to dryland corn, you added 2.7 inches of consumptive use to that model right there. And I'll argue that all the changes that are happening across agriculture, whether it's in pasture land, whether it's in irrigation, whether it's in dry land, that balancing act of consumption, we don't talk enough about. That we don't talk enough about the big picture. That every time that there's a conversation, the big gorilla in the room is groundwater, or it's surface water diversions, or some other use. And how do we work with these? How do we work with these numbers? So I'm really interested to see if we can pull this back together and see what the changes have been in 10 years, because I think they're going to be significant. So what did all that lead to? It led to a lot of things. And I'm just going to go through very quickly some of the things that are happening at the farm level. But I just spent, in the last 3 weeks, I've only been home about 9 days, but I've traveled 6,000 miles. We had a family deal in California that my wife and I drove out I-80 across Salt Lake and Reno, and then we were in Sacramento the day that the governor announced the 25% cutback. And I'm an early riser, so I'm down at the local coffee shop, and I said, "Hey, farmers in the room." And 3 guys stood up, and they had between them about 400 acres just north of Yuba City that was all olive trees, almond, walnuts, and avocados. And the three of them used to be all row crop: strawberries, cabbage, lettuce, all that stuff that was, row crop. But they've gone to trees and drip because they just don't have any water. And in our travels, I wish I had taken pictures. I wish I could have time-lapsed it going across there. We didn't see any water. We did not see any water in Wyoming, in Utah, and Nevada, in California. We did not see any water. None. A little bit of snow top up on the ranges. And I hate to admit, the week before, my sons had taken me skiing for my birthday in Keystone. There's no snow there either. There's no snow in Keystone. That was amazing to me. That's supposed to be the big peak of big peak time of year for them. So we went to the Final Four this weekend, and we drove to St. Joe on purpose, went across Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and it's wet. Not a farmer hardly working. It's wet. I mean, not standing water so much, but nobody working. And we came home yesterday after the final, Monday night. We drove across Iowa and that way, the north route, and came back into Lincoln last night. So I didn't see water, and I'm just going, okay, what's the answer here? What are the conversations? And so what I'm getting back to is the IMP meeting in Cambridge recently for the Republican Basin. We're all sitting in the room and we're all going, okay, what do we do next? And how do we have these conversations, and how do we do this together? And I think eventually these conversations boil back to what we need to understand about what our roles are, or what our businesses are in those interactions. So, with that said, all of these things, as I look at the ground, I look at the farm, I look at what's happening, I look at what they're doing. I visited a popcorn seed foundation by Purdue University outside in Indiana on our way home yesterday, and they have irrigation now. They want to control their production. They want to guarantee seed protection. And their perspective irrigation is different than mine. So all of these things at the farm level, they're all happening. Everything is out there. There's opportunities, data, big data. You hear all this stuff that's happening. It's not changing. It's accelerating. It's growing. And we're able to do some of the things that you're asking us to do. That's report, that's real-time monitor, that's telemetry, that is everything that you can imagine in a model to develop ideas about water strategies. We can do it. The hard part is we're not recognized. We're looking at bigger pictures. We're looking at what augmentation project next. What can we do? How do we get down to the land surface and get to the guys that make the biggest difference? How do we talk to them? The NRDs are working their tails off and still trying to meet compact compliances, meet stream flow, in-stream flows, meet all of this stuff. And how do they have time for the farmers? How do they have time for the guys that are being asked to do the work? They're out there. In the last 2 or 3 years, just phenomenal changes in the way technology is being delivered to my phone, to my iPad, to my desktop, into our own tractors. We're reducing our water pump. It's not that difficult. It really isn't. For whatever reason, whether it's monetary, whether it's demands, $4 corn, everybody's suggesting that we won't invest in water management is the opposite. Our pumping costs aren't going down. Energy, MPPD isn't reducing their energy costs, neither is Central, neither is anybody else. So our costs are still going up. So those opportunities still exist. Accountability is there. I can show you every acre inch that I pump. I can show you where it's delivered to the soil. And yet, how do we have that conversation? How do we keep telling those guys it's the right thing to do? How do we do that? Water Balance Alliance spends a lot of time on these discussions, and not just simply at the ag level, but also ag-urban, which I started out with, is how do we have these conversations? How do we help the legislature? How do we help the decision makers know that this is out there? Everybody in this room can help. Every one of you. This is kind of interesting, but there's a big story behind this, and I'm not going to do this, but this is actually part of our demonstration project. This is out of some of Ted's work with the producers he had, and they're just numbers down here at the bottom, my legal description. But 2012 is a bit of an anomaly, but 13 is more in line with what our historical uses are. But you can see, in the time that we've had this demonstration project, every producer is actually pumping less water. That's okay. But if you don't know all the rest of the story, is that water saved, or is that just simply water that was left on the table to begin with? So we're pretty excited about this because the trends are, by utilizing these ideas, concepts, this isn't all the way to the top with moisture probes and satellites and all that. Some of this is just very simple, beginning level strategies that just make sense. But here's where we end up with today in agriculture. If you look at this bottom line down here, I want you to look at the very right box. Coca-Cola, ConAgra, doesn't matter who they are, they all want to know what we're doing with our water. They all want to know what we're doing at the farm level to produce that crop, whatever it is. Whether it's dry beans, whether it's sugar beets, whether it's wheat, corn, they want to know. They want to know if it's best practice. They want to be able to tell their shareholders that we're doing the right thing. So if we want to market our crop, if we want to have a contract with a processor, we have to sign off on this now. We have an obligation. If we want to be a part of that, now, producing a bushel of corn playing out there, but almost every other specialty crops, between pesticides and water, they ask us. That's pretty sophisticated in terms of this technology, and it's intimidating to a lot of ag producers. Hey, you can sort this off. You can take pieces of this. This just happens to be a model that we operate by on our own farm, and bring in a lot of actually what I would call consultants to help us drive a lot of these decision-making tools down into what we consider to be a marketing process. What's the technology potential? So I took the center pivot and I brought it to Lincoln. And if we took all that stuff that I'm talking about and we just said, okay guys, we recognize in the state of Nebraska that if you'll use these things, that there's a savings to be had. I'm not going to put inches on it, I'm not going to put anything like that on it, but there's a savings to be had. in irrigated agriculture. We apply that, an 8% savings on groundwater, it's a 10-year supply of water for Lincoln. Now, of course, we can't put it all in one place. We can't put it all in the stream at the right time. But that's the numbers that we all can kind of understand on this end of the state. Now, when I go down to the Middle Republican, and I know Jack's here, I'm going to pick on him a little bit, and we're spending $25 million roughly, don't put me in the paper, but because I'm a part of the Republican Basin, we're spending roughly about $25 million annually for water programs. And we're funding that out of our own taxes, our own occupancy tax, and paying our way. $25 million. And so Scott's here with the Sustainability Task Force in 1098. We're arguing about how much money should be in a sustainability fund for water for Nebraska. And then ultimately we take on a Rock Creek project, and also Encorp, which we're all familiar with now, those pretty big names and numbers. But how do we continue to have these conversations and look at it in those two different perspectives? How do we do that? Because we're not talking the same language, or if we're not willing to come to a place and have that conversation, then they're going to start to bow their neck. I'm going to bow my neck. Gosh, you're asking me to pay and play, and you still want me to reduce. It's kind of an interesting concept to me, and that's not that I'm unwilling. It's not that it's not the right thing to do, but that's a tough conversation. Here's what it all comes back to. Water balance approach, 85%. With that historical approach, the water balance approach, irrigation is the biggest user. Evapotranspiration is the big monkey. Finally, the last picture. Amy, I need you to record again.
All right, I gotta help Ron with coffee.
Really? Ron needs help with your job.
Oh, and how is coffee? All
Yeah,
right.
you're sipping or slurping.
Change, or you want to?
Change, yeah, just do it. Same question, what do you see? Does everybody know where this is? Where at? Yes, it is. That is exactly where it's at. It's Platte River. Any comments? Come on, surface water guys. Can you? You're smiling. Come on.
I see a groundwater surface water relationship here.
Okay. Anybody else?
Transmission losses. I can't think of it.
Looks like missed opportunity, looks like wastewater in the background.
No Phragmites.
No Phragmites? pH.
Very few fish.
Everybody else?
Huge change from when I was growing up.
Huge change. Sarah Watermeyer,
Yes, Mr. Rourke?
how are you?
Very good, thank you.
I'm not gonna let you off the hook.
Really?
Nope. From the eastern part of the state, what do you see?
I see the conjunctive use issue, the commingling surface and water rights here. I see all that when I see a big waterway like that, or it's actually the river, excuse me.
Anyone else venture to say? NRD guy?
I see September.
September? Yeah. That's great. That is. Tim?
Unregulated groundwater pumping.
Anybody else? Jim?
Threat to Lincoln's water supply.
Threat to Lincoln's water supply.
I see the signs the mayor put up to reduce water use in the city of Lincoln.
You got good eyes.
Well, I remember that.
Mike Jess?
I see a sad situation and no relief in those clouds.
Is that the new normal in 2030?
I see a cycle.
How about an opportunity at the beginning?
You notice the differences in not only the perception, but also the expectation of what this should look like. I grew up on the South Platte River, and I don't ever remember a time from the 50s as a little boy, or excuse me, in the 60s as a little boy, up until we moved away from there in the middle 70s, the South Platte, that there wasn't a time that we couldn't spear carp or I remember that because I didn't need to. And yet today, I watched the South Platte pretty much run the last 2 out of the last 3 years at a pretty substantial level, and I see that as lost opportunity. You know, what could we have done with that water? Or maybe we did do something with it. I don't know. Not that I really followed up on it, but in an irrigator's mind, a groundwater guy, we have a different perspective of this picture. And it took me a long time to understand that I have a dog in this fight, or I have an obligation, I guess, and that's to not only bring what I have to the table, but also my respect for what everybody else sees there. Recreation or diversions or groundwater or surface water guys that are, you know, unmet diversions. And I wouldn't have been able to say that not so long ago. I wouldn't have. Because my perspective was at that first slide with that pivot, and it's my water, it's my place, it's my family, it's my business, it's my job. Leave me alone. And there's still some of that today. There really is. And so the NRDs are challenged with trying to pull that all together and have those conversations. Surface water guys are doing the same thing, figuring out, you know, how do we divert, how do we generate power, how do we meet endangered species, how do we do all that stuff. But how do we come together and have that conversation? Is it management, or is it just purely being willing to sit in a room, roll up your sleeves, and have the right conversation? Part of what our effort is, in NUBA is, and it was a great, this was a tremendous success story. It's a result of several of the board members in our committee just not so long ago in February. We co-hosted with the Nebraska College of Technical Agriculture in Curtis a soil moisture probe workshop. It was sold out. It was kind of a historic deal, if there's such a thing as historic in the soil moisture probe world. We had every manufacturer in that room, in that facility, having a conversation, and they're going, gosh, how do we get to Nebraska? How do we make our product better? How do we get to you guys? How do we help out? There's even talk of them, they met afterwards, and I met with them for a few minutes, about starting an association in Nebraska so that there's a common place for an NRD water resource guy or a surface water guy to go, hey, how do we move this out? How do we talk to Lindsay and Valley and Reinke and TNL, talk to those guys and get involved with them, which they're doing. Just picking on them because this was tremendous. We had agronomists. We had the right people in the right place at the right time. And we had tremendous support. It was hands-on. One of the things I want to pick on here just a little bit, I don't know if you see the students here. The college, the professor, Brad Ramsdale right here, actually does their agronomy work and teaches, but this was student-led. There was 37 or 35 students involved in this process, and again, the right people, right place at the right time. Same with the Water Leaders Academy. I have helped, and I know several of you in the room have helped with it in the last few years. It's the right place, the right people at the right time. And developing and getting those people to have those conversations that were willing to understand the differences, the geographical differences in what I've tried to point out here today in water. It's a team effort. It was phenomenal. It's as good a conference as I've ever attended in water management. It's another effort that's being led by Steve and Frank and Lee. Is the Ag Urban Roundtable. They had their first meeting in December, talking about just the same thing: is how do we have these discussions? How do we understand? How do we fully get to where we're headed today or tomorrow? We asked this little guy right there, that drop of water, to do a lot in this state. I drove over more big rivers in the last 5 days, in the Illinois River and the Mississippi, and I can't even miss the Bachna, and I never even used to pay attention to it. There's just a river. And now, every one that I went across and came back across, I mean, I paid attention to, is that's somewhat of an obligation. Not somewhat, it is an obligation for us to be a part of. But we asked that little guy to do a lot of work in this state. We try to divide that thing up, whether it's in precip that falls on our ground, or whether it's recharge, or whether it's stream flow, or whether it's whatever it is. We asked that guy to do a lot. And where do we go from here? I looked all over for what a stakeholder is. And I looked in every dictionary, Wikipedia, Wiktionary, I looked in everything, and I really struggled to find something I was really satisfied with, but this is what I ultimately ended up with, and the one that I feel the most attached to, but one that is involved and affected by a course of action, and there isn't anybody in this room that isn't affected by water. Not one of us. Not one of us. We got to have it, every one of us. That's the end of what I have. I have one plug. August 4th, we're going to host, I haven't done it for a couple years, but we're going to host a farmer-led water summit at my farm. We'll have the equipment, we'll have the technology, we'll have real-time, we'll have live screens set up, hopefully, if the technology works. But we will have an actual delivery and explanation by the guys that were part of these demonstration projects. The last time it was well attended. I'd encourage your state senators, in particular, doesn't matter, urban, rural, but I would encourage your state senators to come to this, that it's a comfortable place. We want to hear your ideas, we want to hear what you may have to offer and what you can bring to the table, but more importantly is those discussions and recognition between the differences in those two slides that I put up today. That's all I have.